I'm Linda, 28. My mom just slid a set of flight tickets across the table to my brother and said, "You're only here because I felt sorry for you." That moment shattered me. I'm his older sister, and those words still echo in my head. Where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more family drama stories about betrayal, revenge, and emotional courage. The kitchen light flickered as if it, too, knew what was coming. My mom stood at the counter, her back to me, rustling papers like she always did when she wanted control over the room. The sound of paper sliding against the wood caught my attention. She walked over, set 2 flight tickets in front of my brother, and smiled, not warmly, but with that sharp kind of smile that always made me feel like I was trespassing in my own home. Then she said it. "You're only here because I felt sorry for you." Her voice wasn't raised. It was calm, almost casual, like she was stating the weather. But those words landed heavier than any shout could have. My brother's face stiffened. He looked at me, then quickly back down at the tickets, pretending to study the flight details. I could see the guilt etched in his expression. He didn't ask for this favoritism, but he wasn't about to refuse it either. I froze in my chair. My hands trembled slightly against the table, fingertips brushing the chipped wood. I wanted to ask, "What about me?" But the words stayed lodged in my throat. At that moment, I wasn't her daughter. I was an afterthought. The silence that screamed. The silence after her words stretched on like an endless hallway. I could hear the refrigerator humming, the faint ticking of the old wall clock, even the muffled bark of a neighbor's dog outside. Everything felt amplified because no one dared to speak. I caught myself staring at the tickets, imagining where they led. A city far away? A chance to start over? A fresh future? Whatever it was meant for him, not me. My chair felt smaller, the air around me heavier. I wanted my mom to glance at me, to soften her words, to say she didn't mean it. But she didn't. She carried on, talking to my brother about flight times, luggage, and how he'd need to dress nicely when meeting certain relatives. I might as well have been invisible. Memories that hurt more than the present. Her words stirred up memories I had buried deep. I remembered being 8 years old, standing in the school gym, scanning the crowd for her face after the spelling bee. She never showed up. My brother had a soccer game the same night, and of course, she was there for him. At 16, when I got my first part-time job at the grocery store, I came home excited to share the news. She brushed past me to talk about my brother's new guitar lessons. "We'll need to save for a better instrument soon," she had said, barely glancing at me. It wasn't just favoritism, it was erasure. I grew up learning that my achievements didn't matter unless they somehow benefited my brother. And now here we were as adults, with the same script playing out. My brother's eyes. My brother shifted uncomfortably in his seat, and for a split second, I caught his eyes. There was guilt there, yes, but also resignation. He had grown used to this, being the chosen one. It wasn't entirely his fault, but it didn't make the sting any less sharp. He tried to lighten the mood. Thanks, Mom. I'll make sure to, be on time for the flight." I wanted him to stand up for me, to say, "What about Linda? Doesn't she get a chance?" But he didn't. He never did. His silence was as painful as her words. The weight of staying quiet. I sat there, trapped between anger and despair. A small voice inside me screamed to speak up, to demand fairness, to call out the cruelty in that room. But another voice, the one trained from years of being overlooked, told me to stay quiet. I thought about every time I had spoken up in the past, only to be dismissed. Don't be dramatic. Stop comparing yourself. Life's not fair. Her phrases were stitched into my skin, so familiar that they almost felt like my own thoughts. So I stayed silent, even though every fiber of my being wanted to scream. The words I held back pressed against my chest, making it hard to breathe. A flash of defiance. But silence didn't mean surrender. As I sat there, watching her dote on him, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't loud or obvious. It was quiet, steady, like a small flame catching for the first time. I thought, if she won't see me, I'll make her see me in ways she can't ignore. I didn't know how or when, but I knew this was the moment something changed. Her cruelty, casual as it was, had carved a line in the sand. I couldn't keep living on the wrong side of it. Small incidents that followed. That night, I went upstairs without eating dinner. In my room, I could hear them laughing faintly downstairs. The sound of plates clinking, forks scraping. It felt like two different worlds, mine heavy with silence and theirs light with ease. The next morning, I came down early, hoping to avoid them. But I saw the tickets sitting on the counter again, neatly tucked into an envelope. I touched the edge of the paper, and for a moment, I let myself imagine it was mine. A new city, a new chance. Then I pulled my hand back like the paper had burned me. Later that week, another small incident. Mom needed help fixing the dryer. She called for my brother, even though I was right there, already rolling up my sleeves. I offered, but she brushed me aside, waiting for him to come downstairs. He's better with things like this, she said. I stood there, holding the screwdriver, invisible all over again. Nights of reflection. That first week after the flight ticket moment, I hardly slept. I would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying her words. You're only here because I felt sorry for you. What did she mean by that? Was I an accident? A burden? Did she ever love me, or had pity been her only motivation all along? My mind circled around those questions, never finding answers. But the more I thought about it, the more determined I became. Maybe she saw me as disposable, but I wasn't going to let her words define my future. A promise to myself. I didn't say it out loud, but I made a promise to myself in those sleepless nights. I would no longer beg for her approval. I would no longer measure my worth against her treatment. If she couldn't see me, I would build a life where I couldn't be ignored. That thought was both terrifying and liberating. For the first time in years, I felt like I had a choice. Not to fix her, not to win her over, but to rewrite my own story. The morning after I made that silent promise to myself, the house felt heavier than usual. Sunlight crept through the blinds, cutting across the faded wallpaper in sharp lines, but it didn't brighten anything. The weight of my mother's words still hung in the air, but now, instead of swallowing me whole, they burned like a challenge. I carried that feeling into the kitchen where my mother was already at the stove, frying bacon. The smell filled the room, rich and greasy, the kind that clung to your clothes. My brother sat at the table, still half asleep, his hair sticking up in messy tufts. She had set out his plate with extra care. 2 eggs, bacon arranged neatly, toast buttered just the way he liked it. For me, a single piece of toast sat on a chipped plate at the far end of the table. No bacon. No eggs. I could have asked why, but I didn't. It wasn't worth the argument. That moment said everything I needed to know. A house of unequal weight. Living under her roof was like carrying a shadow that never left me. Every wall in that house carried his presence. The living room shelves overflowed with his soccer trophies, polished and lined up in perfect rows. Framed photos of him holding awards, shaking hands with teachers, and smiling at family gatherings dominated the walls. And then there was me. My school pictures were shoved into a drawer, edges bent, colors fading. My graduation photo, one of the proudest moments of my life, sat in a frame on the back shelf, tucked behind an old vase. You had to move things aside just to find it. Every time I walked through those rooms, I was reminded of my place. Not the daughter who shined, but the one who blended into the background like old wallpaper. Chores that spoke louder than words. It wasn't just about photos or meals. It was the way the workload of the house naturally fell into my lap. Linda, fold the laundry. Linda, vacuum the living room. Linda, can you run to the store? We're out of milk. My brother, on the other hand, got instructions like, don't forget to rest before your game. Your uncle's coming, show him your guitar. You should get to bed early, you've got a big day tomorrow. It wasn't that he never did chores, sometimes he did, but his contributions were praised as though he had moved mountains. I could scrub the kitchen floor until it gleamed, and she would barely glance at it. He could take out the trash once, and she'd smile proudly like he'd done something heroic. A missed opportunity. The unfairness wasn't confined to the walls of our home. It spilled into every opportunity. I remembered one day in high school when the school announced a field trip to Washington, D.C. I had worked hard all semester, earned top grades in history, and my teacher personally encouraged me to go. I rushed home, excitement bubbling up as I explained it to my mom. Her face hardened as soon as I mentioned the cost. That's too expensive, Linda. We just don't have it. I believed her, until a week later when she came home with a brand new soccer uniform for my brother, complete with custom cleats that cost more than the entire field trip. I didn't cry in front of her. Instead, I locked myself in my room and quietly folded away the permission slip. That moment branded itself into me. I wasn't worth the investment. The relatives' eyes. Family gatherings made the favoritism even clearer. At Thanksgiving, my aunt and uncle would arrive with hugs and gifts for both of us, but the conversation always steered toward my brother. How's soccer going? Still playing guitar? You're going to be someone important one day. And me? I'd get a polite smile, maybe a quick, "How's school?" before they turned back to him. My mother encouraged it, guiding the conversation, proudly retelling his accomplishments, while I sat there pushing peas around my plate. It wasn't that I didn't have achievements. I had good grades, volunteered at the library, and even won an essay contest once. But those stories never left our walls, and if they did, they were trimmed down until they sounded like minor footnotes. The relatives never noticed the silence, and if they did, they didn't care. The lonely reward. The strangest thing about living in someone else's shadow is that you start confusing invisibility with comfort. I learned to shrink myself, to find satisfaction in quiet victories that no one else saw. When I saved up for my own pair of sneakers by babysitting for the neighbor, I celebrated alone in my room. When I read 3 novels in a week, I clapped silently for myself before sliding them back onto the shelf. Every accomplishment became private. And while my brother soaked in praise, I grew used to the emptiness of not hearing any. It wasn't fair, but it became my reality. A flicker of resistance. One evening, after clearing the dinner table while my brother and mom watched TV, I caught my reflection in the darkened window. My hair was tied back in a messy bun, my shirt stained with dishwater, my face tired. I whispered to myself, "This isn't who I want to be." It wasn't just about doing chores or being overlooked. It was about the life being carved out for me by someone else's choices. I was being molded into the helper, the background character, the one who existed only to make others shine brighter. That whisper became a spark, small but steady, a subtle act of rebellion. The next morning, my mom asked me to iron my brother's shirt for an event. Normally, I would have done it without a word, swallowing my resentment. But that day I paused. "He can do it himself," I said flatly. Her eyes narrowed, surprised at my tone. For a moment, I thought she might explode. But instead, she muttered something under her breath and went upstairs. It was a small act, barely noticeable to anyone else, but it mattered to me. It was proof that I didn't have to comply with every order, proof that I had a choice. The tension grows. After that, little acts of resistance slipped into my days. I stayed longer at the library instead of rushing home to help with chores. I started saying no to errands that could easily be handled by my brother. Mom noticed. Her comments turned sharper, her eyes colder. "You're getting lazy. You've changed, Linda. You should be more supportive of your brother." Each jab was meant to drag me back into line, but instead they fueled me. The more she pushed, the more I realized how much space her favoritism had taken in my life. The pain of realization. What hurt most wasn't her treatment of me. It was realizing how much I had allowed it to shape me. For years, I had bent myself into silence, hoping she'd see me. For years, I had accepted crumbs of attention, convincing myself they were enough. Standing in the shadow wasn't just about her choices. It was about mine too. I had believed her version of me for too long. That night, I sat on my bed, hugging my knees, and whispered another promise. This time louder, firmer. I won't stay in this shadow forever. I don't know what exactly snapped inside me that day, but something did. Maybe it was the way Mom's voice echoed in my ears, dismissive and sharp. Or maybe it was the look of smug satisfaction on my brother's face. Whatever it was, I felt my chest tighten until I thought I would explode. For years, I had swallowed every insult, every comparison, every moment of being overlooked. But in that instant, the dam inside me finally burst. Enough! The word ripped out of my mouth before I even realized I had spoken. It wasn't a whisper. It wasn't quiet. It was raw, loud. and shaking with all the years of silence I had endured. Both Mom and my brother froze, eyes widening as if they had just seen me for the first time in years. Mom blinked, her lips parting. "Excuse me." Her tone was sharp, as though I had just broken some sacred family rule. I stood up so quickly that the chair scraped harshly against the kitchen tiles. My hands trembled, but I refused to let them see it. I said, "Enough, Mom. I am tired of being treated like I don't matter. I'm tired of being invisible in my own home." The room went so quiet, I could hear the faint tick of the clock on the wall. My brother leaned back, arms crossed, smirking like this was some kind of show he was enjoying. That smirk was gasoline on the fire already burning inside me. "Don't you dare talk to me like that," Mom snapped, her voice rising. "I have done everything for you. Everything. And this is how you speak to me." I laughed, but it wasn't out of humor. It was bitter, broken, the sound of years of hurt finding a voice. "Everything for me? Really? Then tell me, Mom. When was the last time you remembered my birthday without someone reminding you? When was the last time you looked at me and saw me? Not the failure, not the disappointment, not the shadow of him." I pointed at my brother, who now shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Mom's face reddened. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. For the first time in years, she was speechless. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't. "You always say he's the star, the golden child, the one who deserves the world. And me? I'm just here. You never asked me what I wanted. You never cared what I needed. You only saw me as someone you had to tolerate." My voice cracked, but I pushed through it. "Do you have any idea how it feels to grow up knowing your own mother wishes you were someone else?" My brother tried to interject. "Oh, come on, Linda. You're being dramatic." Mom didn't. "Shut up," I shouted, turning on him so fast he flinched. "You don't get to tell me how I feel. You've had her love, her attention, her pride your entire life. You don't know what it's like to fight for scraps of affection and still come up empty every single time." For once, he didn't have a comeback. His smirk faltered, replaced by something that almost looked like guilt. Almost. Tears stung my eyes, but I refused to let them fall just yet. I wasn't going to break, not in front of them. Not this time. "Do you know how many nights I cried myself to sleep, Mom? Do you know how many times I begged God to just make me enough for you? And every time, I woke up to the same cold truth. I'll never be him. And that's all you see." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Mom finally sank into a chair, her shoulders slumping as if the weight of my words pressed down on her. She looked older in that moment, but I couldn't find sympathy for her. "Not after everything. You don't understand," she whispered finally, her voice trembling. "I was under pressure, your father." I cut her off, shaking my head. "Don't you dare blame this on Dad or anyone else. This was you. You chose to put him on a pedestal. You chose to tear me down instead of lifting me up. And you know what? I believed you for so long. I believed I wasn't worth it. But not anymore." The words poured out of me like I had rehearsed them 1,000 times in the dark of my room. Every memory, every scar carved into my heart became fuel. "You've made me doubt myself at every turn. You made me believe I was small, that I didn't deserve anything good. But here's the truth, Mom. I do deserve better. I deserve love, respect, and a family that sees me. And if I can't have that here, then I'll find it somewhere else." Her eyes widened at that last part, as if the thought of me leaving was the real shock. "Linda, no. You don't mean that." I looked at her, really looked at her, and for once, I didn't see the towering figure who had control over me. I saw a woman, flawed and afraid, but no longer someone who could break me. "I do mean it," I said softly but firmly. The tears finally spilled over then, but they weren't the tears of weakness I once knew. They were cleansing, a release. And as they rolled down my cheeks, I felt lighter, freer, like a chain had finally snapped. The air was thick with unspoken words, but I didn't wait for her to respond. I turned and walked toward my room, my footsteps echoing in the hallway. Every step felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I thought I had lost. Inside my room, I collapsed onto the bed, shaking from the adrenaline. My heart pounded, my mind racing with everything that had just happened. Had I gone too far? Would she ever forgive me? Did I even care if she did? As I stared at the ceiling, the weight of it all pressed down on me. This wasn't just a fight. This was years of pain, finally given a voice. And though I was exhausted, I also felt a strange sense of peace. For the first time, I hadn't stayed silent. I had fought back. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. I sat on my bed, heart still racing from the confrontation that had just unfolded. My hands shook as I pressed them into the blanket, grounding myself, reminding myself that it was real. I had spoken back. I had stood up for myself. But the echo of my words, "I'll find it somewhere else," kept bouncing inside my head like a warning I hadn't fully prepared for. For years, I had been the quiet one, the forgotten one, the shadow nobody bothered to notice. Tonight, though, I wasn't invisible. I had ripped the curtain open, and there was no going back. But I knew one thing with chilling clarity. If Mom and my brother could twist the truth behind closed doors, they would. They always had. And if I didn't take control of the narrative now, I'd be painted as the ungrateful daughter who snapped for no reason. I couldn't let that happen. The next morning, the kitchen was eerily quiet when I walked in. Mom sat at the table with a mug of coffee, her eyes red-rimmed, her face pale. My brother leaned against the counter, scrolling on his phone like nothing had happened. The smell of burnt toast lingered in the air, and the silence felt like a storm waiting to break. Mom finally looked up at me. Her voice was low, almost careful. "Linda, we need to talk about last night." I took a seat across from her, folding my hands on the table. "Yes, we do." Her brows knit together. "You embarrassed me. You humiliated this family." There it was, the shift, the attempt to turn my honesty into betrayal. I leaned forward. "No, Mom. I exposed the truth. And you're not upset because I lied. You're upset because I finally told the truth out loud." My brother chuckled under his breath. "Here we go again. Drama queen." I snapped my gaze toward him. "You think this is drama? Try living a life where every good thing you do is invisible, where every mistake is magnified, where your own mother looks at you and sees nothing but disappointment. That's not drama, that's survival." For once, his smirk faltered. The tension at home only grew heavier after that. Mom avoided me most of the day, retreating into her room. My brother kept trying to provoke me, tossing little comments my way, but I didn't bite. I knew I had to be smarter. If I wanted the truth to come out, it couldn't just be my word against theirs. It had to be undeniable. That night, I sat on my bed scrolling through old photos on my laptop. Memories flashed by. School plays where I was cast in the background. Family trips where I was cropped out of group shots. Birthdays where my cake was an afterthought compared to my brother's grand celebrations. The proof was right there, in plain sight, waiting to be pieced together. I started compiling. Every photo, every text message, every subtle reminder that I had been treated as an afterthought. I gathered it all. By midnight, I had a folder labeled "The Truth." It wasn't for revenge. It was for clarity. For once in my life, I wanted the story to be told as it really was, not how Mom or my brother would spin it. A few days later, an opportunity came. My Aunt Claire invited us over for dinner. She was one of the few relatives who had ever asked me how I was really doing, but even she didn't know the full extent of what had been going on. As we sat around her table, the usual pattern began. Mom bragging about my brother's latest accomplishment, while I sat in silence, invisible. Something in me refused to stay quiet this time. I reached into my bag, pulled out my phone, and placed it on the table. "Do you know what it's like, Aunt Claire, to sit through every family gathering and listen to how perfect he is while no one even remembers what you're doing with your life?" The table went silent. My mom shot me a warning glare, but I pressed on. "Do you know that at my last birthday, Mom forgot to buy a cake until the store was closing? Do you know she once told me I should be grateful she even let me stay in this house?" Claire's eyes widened. "Linda, is that true?" Mom sputtered, her voice defensive. "She's exaggerating. She always does this." I unlocked my phone and slid it across the table. "No, Mom. This is the truth." Claire scrolled through the photos and screenshots. Her face shifted from disbelief to shock, then to anger. She looked up at Mom, her voice sharp. "How could you treat her like this?" For the first time, the room wasn't stacked against me. For the first time, someone else saw. Of course, the fallout at home was brutal. Mom accused me of trying to ruin the family image, while my brother claimed I was jealous of his success. But something had changed. Their words didn't land the way they used to, because now, I had exposed the truth. It wasn't just in my head anymore. It wasn't just me fighting alone in the dark. That night, lying in bed, I realized exposing the truth wasn't about tearing them down. It was about freeing myself. About reclaiming the voice they had stolen from me for years. And as I stared at the ceiling, I made myself a quiet promise. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of finally being seen. Lying in the dark that night, I felt a strange mix of fear and relief. The house was quiet, but the silence wasn't heavy the way it used to be. It wasn't suffocating. For once it felt like air, thin, fragile, but breathable. Exposing the truth had cracked something open, and I knew I couldn't put it back. I closed my eyes, replaying Aunt Claire's face at the dinner table. The way her eyes had widened as she saw the proof. For the first time, someone outside these walls had seen me. Really seen me. That thought became a spark inside my chest. Maybe I wasn't crazy. Maybe I wasn't exaggerating. Maybe my story mattered. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual. The sunlight streamed through the blinds, casting golden lines across the floor. I sat up slowly, listening to the faint creaks of the house. Mom's footsteps shuffled in the hallway, then faded. My brother's laughter echoed from the living room, as carefree as ever. Life went on for them, unchanged. But for me, everything felt different. I didn't want to stay in the same cycle anymore. I didn't want to wait around for them to validate me. If I wanted a future, I'd have to build it myself. I started small. That afternoon, I walked to the local coffee shop, a little place on the corner with squeaky chairs and the smell of fresh cinnamon rolls. I brought my laptop, opened that folder labeled The Truth, and stared at it for a long while. Then I minimized it and opened a blank document. What if I just wrote it down? I whispered to myself. The cursor blinked back at me, daring me. So I began typing. Not an essay, not a complaint, not a plea for attention, just my story. Every detail, every memory, every wound. The words poured out like they had been trapped in my chest for years. I wrote until my fingers ached and my coffee grew cold. When I finally leaned back, nearly 2 hours had passed. The document was long, messy, but it was mine. And reading through it, I realized something. My voice had power. Days turned into weeks, and with each one, I carved out more space for myself. I applied for a part-time job at the bookstore down the street. When the manager, a kind woman named Denise, asked me why I wanted the job, I didn't stumble or shrink back. Because I need something that belongs to me, I said simply. She smiled and handed me the schedule. Then you've come to the right place. Working there became my first taste of independence. Shelving books, chatting with customers, recommending stories. It wasn't glamorous, but it felt grounding. It felt like I was stepping into a world that wasn't defined by my brother's shadow or my mother's disappointment. At home, nothing magically changed. Mom still favored my brother. He still teased me. But something inside me had shifted. Their words no longer pierced the way they used to. I had found a small piece of myself outside those walls. And it gave me strength. One evening, as I came home from work, Mom was waiting in the kitchen. She looked tired, worn down in a way I hadn't noticed before. Linda, she said softly, we need to talk. I set my bag down, my heart beating faster. About what? Her eyes flickered, avoiding mine. About everything. About how I treated you. I stood still, unsure whether to believe her. For years, apologies were foreign in this house. But she kept talking. I don't know why I pushed you away. Maybe I saw too much of myself in you. Maybe I was afraid you'd make the same mistakes I did. But I know I was wrong. And I know I hurt you. The words hung in the air, fragile and unexpected. Part of me wanted to cry. Another part wanted to scream that it was too late. Instead, I took a deep breath. Thank you for saying that. But Mom, you can't just apologize and expect everything to be fixed. It doesn't work like that. Her face fell, but she nodded. I know. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a start. That night, lying in bed, I thought about what future really meant. For so long, I had believed my future was tied to their approval. But slowly, piece by piece, I was learning that my future was mine to claim. The next weekend, I signed up for a night class at the community college, creative writing. It felt like a risk, like a step into something unknown. Sitting in that classroom surrounded by strangers, I felt nervous, small. But when the professor asked us to introduce ourselves, I didn't freeze. "My name is Linda," I said, my voice steady. "And I'm here because I want to tell my story." The room was quiet for a moment, and then the professor smiled. "That's exactly why we're here." Weeks later, on a crisp fall morning, I walked to the park with my journal. The leaves crunched under my shoes, the air smelled like wood smoke, and for once, I didn't feel invisible. I sat on a bench, opened my notebook, and began to write again. This time, I didn't write about pain. I wrote about hope, about resilience, about finding strength in the shadows. My story wasn't finished, but it was changing. And for the first time, I was the one holding the pen. As I closed my journal, I looked up at the sky. It was wide, endless, stretching out in every direction. And I realized my future was just like that, open, waiting, ready to be walked into. I stood, adjusted my bag on my shoulder, and took a deep breath of the cool morning air. This time, I wasn't walking into someone else's shadow. I was walking into my own future.